Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. I'm excited about this one because it might get a little controversial. I don't know. We're talking about the moon phase today and some new research that's been done around moon phase, moon positioning, and its effect on deer movement. We're in Starkville, Mississippi, talking with Mr. Bronson Strickland. Dr. Bronson Strickland. I always say Mr., but you're a doctor, man. I got to give you credit.
Yeah, whatever. I answered anything. I answered a hey you, so whatever.
Jacob, how are you?
Doing well. Yeah, just here at Mississippi State University. Super excited for this episode just because this is something that it gets brought pretty often with a lot of our podcast guests, which is moon position, some of the moon phase, but really moon positioning in regards to increased buck movement. Especially we hear from some of that with past podcast guests when hunting specific deer. And it's something that I've kind of casually paid attention to in the past. And we were kind of talking about this off air that, if one of these hunts lined up where the weather was great and I saw, moon was going to be overhead or rising right around, prime time in the morning, I'd get real excited going out there. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But we're going to talk about that and some of the data that y'all have been able to pull out of this GPS data study that y'all did a handful of years ago where y'all had 60 bucks collared. And we'll kind of give a little update on that. Median age is middle-aged deer, 3.5 to 4.5-year-old deer of bucks. And we're going to kind of look at some of this data and break it out and see, how much of a factor, if any, a factor, the moon plays on overall deer movement. So, Bronson, appreciate you hopping on with us.
Absolutely. This has been a lot of fun, this analysis. It's also, it's one of the ones where we get the most negative feedback. It's one of the ones where there may be the most expletives in the comments section. So it's been a little bit different in that regard. So it definitely addresses some intergenerational beliefs that people have. And literally, because, kind of doing a background and review for this kind of thing, this, I think, I don't remember the decade. I want to say the 1930s or 40s. The very first book was written on this topic. And ever since then, I think it just gets a greater and greater hold with people. And the cool thing about this analysis is it's not what people see. It's not what people think. We let the deer tell us. And so we let the deer, let their responses validate or invalidate all the different moon theories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that and also, like you said, it's ingrained in the whitetail culture. I don't think I hear anybody else. Then again, I'm not really big into like Western big game or anything like that. But I don't know if any other groups are as so, I guess, have their beliefs on moon and moon positioning, moon phase as whitetail hunters. That's something that, again, even growing up, like the big thing I heard growing up was like full moon days. Sometimes my uncle's like, oh man, it might be a real good day for movement. They've been out kind of all day. Morning activity might be good and it gets slow. And then other people are like, oh, it's going to be terrible hunting conditions. You got to hunt midday because the deer been up all night and they're just going to go lay down. So that's kind of the most we got into moon phase. We never really paid attention to moon positioning until we started interviewing guys over the past 8 years now. We've been doing the show that had come up more prevalent. And guys talking about that and the success they've had and, just kind of piecing the things together that it kind of affected me a little bit. Like, okay, I'm going to start paying attention to us. We have buddies of ours who do the same thing. And it's like you have mixed results. Some people swear by it. Some people are like, absolutely not. There's no case for why this is going to be, a factor for deer movement. And today we're going to explain it. And we're going to go through it all based off GPS data and kind of what the findings were. So,
yeah, I want to kick it off by prefacing the whole thing with, we interviewed you last year about buck bedding, GPS studies around buck bedding. I'll link that in the description. Everyone should go watch it if you haven't already. It's a really good episode. In that one, I think we alluded to some of the moon stuff a little bit. And we even talked off camera a good bit about the best ways to break down the moon thing, because I had seen data in the past where they're talking about like full moon versus new moon versus all the phases, and less about the positioning, and then also just ways that the data was parsed up about, did he move 50 yards more? Like, what time of day was he moving? And just, that's one of the criticisms you hear a lot, is that level of data has not really been parsed out yet. And you guys had the data. Mm-hmm. It's sitting there. You just got to go and go through it and figure everything out. And one thing that you guys did that I'm so happy and excited that y'all did was you put out a survey which you then used to do this study, where you asked people, okay, what are your thoughts on the moon, essentially, and what would be a significant, like, what are you looking for in the data? So if they move 50 yards, is that significant? Do you need them to move 100 yards, 200 yards? And got the survey results back. I participated in the survey. And one thing that one of your graduate students, Luke, brought up on the podcast that you guys did, which I'll also link, super deep dive into all the numbers and the data on this. One thing that he brought up is a lot of people have an opinion about the moon. But when you ask them to put it on paper and really describe what they think, maybe hit a little bit of a wall. And that happened to me when I was doing that survey, because I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this and see. And some of those questions, I was like, crap, I don't really know. I've never thought about it. Like, it's a very, I don't know, at least for me, not all guys are like this, but it's always been kind of a surface level thought of like, oh, the moon affects deer movement. But it's never been like, well, how does it affect it? How much does it affect them? That kind of thing. So real quick right here at the beginning, let's talk about the survey.
Okay.
And then that'll kind of launch us into the rest of the conversation.
Sounds great. Real quick, before we get into that, just how this evolved with us, I was thinking about, it's been several years ago. I did a very, very, nothing compared to what we're going to talk about here, really rudimentary analysis where all I did was plot moon phase. And so I still remember the graphic I did. So over time, over the hunting season, I did the oscillation of going from new moon to full moon to new moon to full moon. And underneath that and superimposed was buck movement rate. To me, it was very, very apparent that whether we had a new moon or a full or a new, and then we just saw the movement rate, no variation. In other words, when there was a new moon, we didn't see an uptick or a decrease, or a full moon, we didn't see an uptick. And so I just thought, we're done with it. We're going to put it out there. That's going to put it to bed. But that is when we first started getting so much feedback, which nicely kind of saying, hey, you knucklehead, it's not about moon phase. You know, Grandpa believed in moon phase. It's all about the position, overhead, underfoot, rising, setting, stuff like that. So that's what got us into the next part here. And the rationale for that, of doing that survey, is when we started getting these results, is you got to think about every time you make a calculation, you're of course going to get a number. And we can talk about how we compared it to baseline and so forth. But if we're going to set our standard, our baseline at 0, when you just run the numbers, you're going to get an average that is different from 0. The question is, how different from 0 does it need to be before there is support, before you believe this is a real phenomenon here? And so I'll pose it this way, because I get this question all the time. Is supplemental feeding worthwhile?
Ooh.
Well, you got to go into, what is going to be your expense for the feed, and what is your expectation for you're presuming there is going to be an increase in Boone and Crockett's score. So I can come up real quick with a scenario with both of y'all, and you want to spend 10 grand a year? 50, 100 grand a year. You say, I've got the money, I'm going to do it. Yes, I'm going to do it. And then I turn right around and say, what's your expectation for the increase in Boone and Crockett's score? Is 2 inches enough? 5, 10? So there's a balance point there to where you have to figure out this is real enough and the effect is large enough to where I'm going to jump in with both feet. So we wanted to set a standard. That was why we got into the survey, was just some real rudimentary of how many people think, the phenomenon is working. And if you do, and you were a cop-out, you didn't say what you answered, is what's going to be that standard, that baseline that we can compare it to? Because we're going to find a number different from 0, but is it enough for you to go, I told you so, there's something going on with the moon? Is a 0.5% change enough, something's going on? Or do you need a 20% change or a 50% change? So that was the rationale behind us doing it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And again, I love that y'all did that, because I mentioned it briefly, but I'm going to mention it again. You guys did a podcast on this at Deere University. I'll link it down below. Everyone can go listen to it. we queued it up on the drive over here this morning. We're like, crap, this thing's like 2.5 hours or something like that.
One.
And because we didn't queue it up till like halfway through the drive, and we're like, we don't have enough time to finish this. But so we went through it and we were listening to parts of it. And you guys, we're not going to do it quite as much on this podcast. We're going to do a little more kind of color commentary. But on that one, y'all get way into the weeds of the numbers, the methodology, what different things mean. And if this is your forte, if this is what you're super interested in, definitely go look at that, because it's gonna give you what you want. Yeah. there's a lot of great information there. And Natasha
Neary,
she did a phenomenal job breaking it down too.
She absolutely did.
Her and Luke both did a really good job of making it understandable.
Yeah.
So hats off to them. Kudos to them.
I completely agree. Couldn't have done it without them.
So let's
go back to the survey.
Yeah.
I want to get to the survey aspect. How did y'all develop the questions for the survey that were something that could be measurable? Because I was impressed on how you did it, because we had talked about that a little bit. Like, if y'all could look at moon phase, this is last summer, moon position, you'd be really interested. And then, 4 weeks later, you sent us kind of the preliminary survey. And I was like, dang, these are like good questions. So how did y'all develop it, and what all did you need to ask in order to give you the baseline of what you should be looking for?
Great question. We had to put it in terms of what we could measure. So we can't measure. It'd have been great to say, under such and such a moon condition situation, do you think you'll see more deer, yes or no? And you would answer however you want. We can't measure that. So the things that we can measure is, number one, is the buck moving or not? So he's either bedded or stationary. And then if he is on his feet and moving, how much? What is his movement rate? So that is what prompted us to, okay, what are we going to measure? What's going to be our averages and the error associated with it? Those are the terms we have to quantify. So that led us on the survey to giving you, we kind of had a dichotomous key. If you believe, go here. And then what would be your expectation? Is it an increase of 10 yards per hour, 50 yards per hour, 500 yards per hour? That's how we arrived at that.
So again, the yards per hour is something we're going to hear a lot about in kind of this podcast when it comes to the study. And that is something that we've kind of discussed in the past with you in past podcast episodes. Again, going back to the looking at buck bedding and buck movement that we covered last summer in roughly June, came out in June of 2014, 2024.
2014.
Yeah, my decades are wrong. Sorry, guys. The yards per hour is something that's very interesting, because, again, that is how you're able to see, is there any kind of increase at all in just overall distance move, whether it's a couple yards or hundreds of yards change, which I really like, because to me that makes it a lot more easier to understand as someone who doesn't study this for a living, to be able to apply, like, does that, like, looking back at myself, and whether it's a piece of private land or public land I hunt, is it going to make a difference for me in any factor when it comes to increasing or decreasing, yards per hour with a buck movement? So very excited to hear that. So,
and it still doesn't mean the buck is going to move where you're going to see it. It just, and we can't quantify that. All we can quantify, are they bedded or not? Are they on their feet? If so, how quickly are they moving? What is their movement rate? So that was how we framed the questions.
Also about the survey, could you give us maybe an idea of overall what was the majority of some of the survey results of what the survey participants really were thinking? And also, did y'all have a differing opinion or any kind of opinion, hypothesis before going into this?
This notion of the moon affecting deer is culturally embedded like a tick. It is burrowed in. 83% of survey respondents, 83% thought that it has some influence. So that's where we start very generally. Does it have some influence? And then we started parsing apart now, is it the moon phase, meaning new or full? Is it the moon position, overhead, underfoot, and is it the combination? And so of those 83%, 25% thought it's just phase. And typically phase is going to mean luminosity. Is it brighter at night or darker at night? And then we have the serious people You know, these are your saddle guys,
The
probably.
yeah, that's your YouTubers.
And I do say that with respect. Guys that are a lot more, you know, when I assess the comments and these people have very, very technical questions. I mean, you can tell they have a lot of sense and mathematical prowess when they ask these questions, but that was only about 13%.
Oh,
So
really?
the phase was the majority, 13% was just position, completely independent of phase, and then it was about 45% with both. You know, there was a relationship with both of those things was affecting deer movement.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, that's kind of what I would expect. I thought that the percentage of moon positioning, I thought that would be more.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the play between both of them, that sounds about right for sure.
So since you're not going to answer exactly what your values were on the survey, I do have a question for you.
Okay.
I'm assuming you answered that you did think it was going to have some type of impact.
I think I did now. I think I answered some impact, and then when I went through, I think I said I think I might have said both. I'm trying to remember now. And then for the effects, I definitely leaned lower. Like if it has an effect, it's a very small one. It's not
Okay.
like they'll be moving like 300 extra yards.
I said 50 yards overall movement, and then said both on phase and position. And I mean, those are the two major ones. So yeah, I don't mind saying it. Andrew's over here like kind of like cold feeting it. You know, drift off into the corner. I didn't take the survey.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But again, it was actually something that when you sent the survey out, and we'll kind of get off the survey here because some people might not find it overly interesting compared to the data, which we're going to get into. A lot of our friends, like core group of friends, they all took the survey and they were discussing, like we had a long text thread about it, and kind of going back and forth on, you know, phase, positioning, both, increased movement. And I think the average was at 50 yards to, I think a couple people did 100 yard potential yards per hour increase of movement. So anyways, we're going to see how it played out in the data. But yeah, it's, I think like you mentioned, like I'm going to say mobile hunters. I feel like a lot of the mobile hunting guys are the ones who trying to look at every small little detail and what can help or hurt a situation. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of that crowd is very much looking at the moon phase and especially the positioning as something to try to take advantage of if there's advantage there. And some of the, I guess, non-mobile guys, that your traditional box stands, ladder stands, pre-hung lock-ons, still pay attention to it, but it's not as much detail as you might see in some of the mobile community for whatever reason. That's just what I've seen.
That is exactly the feedback we got, and some of them were very forthcoming, and I really respected this. But like y'all, I reached out to some other people that are really in the hunting industry, and what are your thoughts about this, advice about the survey? And some of them would say, I'm not going to say who, but it was a number, was, you know, in my world, the way I hunt, it is number one, rut phase. It is number two, weather, and kind of a distant third, what also may be playing a little bit of a role is also moon. So they attributed that there may be a little bit going on there, but it was definitely third on the list with the stuff they could count on and plan for.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, what you haven't answered, and I haven't asked,
Oh, okay.
why? Why does the moon... And
okay. Never mind.
why would the moon affect buck activity?
I'll take the heat off Andrew.
Dude,
I'll be honest. I'm influenced by more successful hunters that we've interviewed. That
Okay,
says
yeah,
it's important.
That's what gets me, because when if I sit there and think about it, I'm like, why would the moon being overhead? Because people be like, oh, well, the tides are controlled. Like it has such a huge influence on everything. And I'm like, okay, I don't really buy that. What gets me is what he said. A lot of the really successful hunters that we know swear by the moon, the moon phase. And I think I told you last time.
Phase position.
Phase position, whatever. I think I told you last time that I've tried to pay attention in my own hunting to it. And it's like, I'll pay attention to it. And every time I try to pay attention to it, I feel like I can't figure out what's going on. And it's just more confusing than it was before. So I kind of, for my own hunting purposes, I don't really pay attention to it. But like in that survey, I'm like, could it have an effect? Maybe. I don't know. But I think it'd be a really small one and the reason I say that is because I feel like if it was a really, really big effect, because I do know people who are like, no, moon trumps weather. I do know people who are like that. I feel like if that was the case, it would be a lot more obvious.
Yeah.
And easy to just see and measure.
You ought to be able to document it a lot.
Right.
A lot easier.
Yeah, I was going to say, once we started interviewing some of these people, I started paying attention to it. Like Alabama's Game and Fish app, where you check in your harvest animals. It's got the major, minor feed times on it.
Yep.
Overhead, underfoot, and then rising or setting moons. And I started just paying attention to it on hunts because, again, we interviewed so many people that really were like dead set on it. And I would have some hunts I was like, oh, this was spot on. I mean, spot on. And then other times I'm like, I must have not sat in a great spot because it's major feed time at 4:30 in the afternoon. I'm not seeing anything. But there was every now and then you have a hunt where there was a major, say, overhead time at 8:30 in the morning. 8:27, you see a buck come or doe, or you start seeing some deer. And you're like, oh man, this is so. You'd have I guess you say confirmation bias. So just having those experiences, and then you'd have hunts that it didn't lay out exactly how you want it, and you're just like, oh, well, it was just a dud today. But then you'd have other hunts it would line up. So that was something that I just kind of paid attention to, and it wasn't ever like I'm only hunting today because of that. But if I looked at it when I was going to go hunt, or the days I was going to go hunt, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to make sure I'm off my phone between these hours and really pay attention. So anyway, but
the other thing too is when it comes to phase or luminosity of the moon, that makes actually more sense to me than the moon positioning, because I'm like, well, if it's really, really bright at night, either they want to move more or want to move less. And that's really, when I refer to me trying to figure out moon phase, that's really more what I paid attention to whenever I've gone through these stages of like actually thinking about it.
Yeah.
Was that makes a lot more sense to me than like some kind of gravitational effect, which I don't, anyways.
Yeah.
We've had people talk about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So even on our team, Steve Damaris was absolutely, he is a believer. And the context of that, though, is when he was coming through school and a young professional, everything was based on spotlight surveys, whether it's counting deer at night with a spotlight, whether it be collecting deer at night with a spotlight. And he just declares, he said it was just common knowledge that the moon was impacting that, believe it or not. And so that was fixed with him as well, that there's an influence. Coincident? Go ahead.
How so, though? Was it like full moon nights seeing more deer or vice versa? Or?
I believe it was the new moon.
Okay.
You would see more activity.
Okay.
I may have that reversed, though, to be honest with you, now that I think about it. See, I just don't put a lot of weight into it. I don't commit it to memory. I'm sorry.
But anyways, he had seen something going through school and everything that made him a believer. So interesting.
Right. So we had competing forces going through. We had some people rooting for a particular hypothesis, but we let the data tell us what it is. Interestingly, not to get us too sidetracked, there are some studies in the literature, but they were focused on car collisions, vehicle collisions, even in Europe as well as the U.S. And the handful of them that were out there, believe it or not, there were more collisions on the full moon. And so there's a couple ways, that's what's always a couple steps to reconcile. So you might say, oh, well, it was a full moon, luminosity was greater, the deer moved or more predisposed to moving, and because of that, they were hit more on the highway. Other way of saying it, this might be a Carl Miller question. Like, they can already see well at night to begin with. They already have these structures in their eyes, structures to capture the light. It could also be that they were moving normally and they already have this light from the moon, and then the vehicle light overwhelms them and it blinds them at a greater frequency. So there's so many ways to parse that apart. So to me, the best way to look at it is the data from the GPS collars and compare their movement rate, moving or not, relative to these different moon theories.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I like that.
And y'all were talking earlier about it's kind of a U.S. thing, or kind of a whitetail thing.
Yeah.
It carries all the way to Australia. Yeah,
Oh, really?
absolutely. When I was in Australia, we talked about the moon, and it was kind of the exact same things about how it influences the deer species down there. So it's not just us.
So I was glad to know we're not just all the weirdos
Yeah.
Right.
looking at it.
So kind of getting into people's thoughts a little bit more here. You got a slide that says like 81% of hunters think the moon affects what time a buck leaves his afternoon bed. So that would be kind of the camp that I would fall into. Like when I was doing that survey, I'm like, if it does have an effect, I don't feel like the effect would be it makes them move more like distances. And I think that's what I was getting at earlier with one of the studies or graphics or whatever I've seen in the past was like, well, the bucks move the same amount day to day no matter what the moon phase. And it's like, yeah, they might move the same amount, but are they moving at a different time?
Right.
And so that's what that would be. So most people who think the moon affects their movement are thinking that it would make them leave an afternoon bed earlier.
Yes, that's 86% of those that thought it influenced said they're going to be on their feet earlier in the afternoon.
Okay. So are we good on the survey? Have we missed anything there? Or
I think for that part, I think we need to look at now how we're describing deer activity and some of the other stuff we've talked about previously. We got to set our baseline.
Right.
And so if you look at a context of on the average, independent of any moon, any weather, anything whatsoever, our general average is 265 yards per hour. So all things being equal, the bucks are moving about 265 yards per hour, and they are bedded about a third of daylight hours. Exactly 34%, but you can say about a third of the day they're in the bed. So we're kind of using that now to compare everything against. So that's the deer telling us what they do. And then we're also now going to look at hunter expectations, what they are expecting. And let's get to that. Okay, so from the survey, people said this was our average. Bucks are moving, there's an increase of 50 yards per hour. So that is a moon effect on the movement rate, as we expect there to be at least 50 yards per hour. Now, in terms of bedding time, that they're going to be bedded for 30 minutes less. So they would be up on their feet 30 minutes earlier than normal. And then lastly, bucks leaving their beds at least 30 minutes earlier would increase activity. So again, just that same metric there.
That's what people responded on the survey, and
that's right.
Generally, that's what people were looking for.
That at least a half hour.
Gotcha.
So we want 50 yards per hour movement rate. They're better be on their feet at least 30 minutes earlier. So there's our standard to compare results to.
Okay. So then, again, getting back to the moon position and what is this word?
Solunar.
Solunar. Every time I come here, I learn a new difficult word. Tortuosity. Solunar?
Solunar.
Solunar theory. So what is the solunar theory?
That is basically, so this is now, for all the people that contacted us that you're doing it wrong, so now we're not concerned as much with phase, or phase can be a part of it, new moon, full moon, but it's now about moon position. So that's kind of what that is. And that's where if you go back, to when all of us were young and you go to the hunting and fishing store, whatever it was, and you get the almanac and the major feeding times and the bedding times. And it doesn't matter if you're deer hunting or you're fishing. It's all governed by the moon. That is what that is based on. And so it's various combinations of day ratings. Day ratings are based on phase. So that's new moon, completely new moon, or completely full moon, etc. So there's ratings there. And then you couple that with the solunar part of it is where is the moon at. So kind of think of a day rating as giving you, according to the theory, that's giving you your optimal day. The moon position then is giving you the time of day, hence the feeding time and the bedding time. That's based on where the moon is at going around the earth.
Okay, gotcha. So, yeah, and I mean, there's a bunch of apps out there that do that. There's like Where to Hunt app or When to Hunt app or something like that. where you can log on there, and some of them have stars, like this is a 5-star day. Some of them have little deer icons where it's a 4-deer day. Jody Mesh talked about that. He likes that thing. He's another one that is like a moon guy that we talked to, and he uses that app. He's like, I go on those 4-deer days, man. Like that's what he's got confidence in.
Bronson, do you know what's the history of these feed charts or deer movement charts around moon phase or position, like when that kind of started? Like, do you have any idea when that really took place? You said the first book that was written on it was like in the 30s, but I don't know when the charts came about. But it's like our whole lives, there's always been charts of some sorts.
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, I'm not going to say I spent just hours and hours and hours trying to dig into that, but I did make a good faith effort to try to find where did this begin. And all I found was a particular book that was referenced by some of these guides. Author I cannot remember, from, I think, Wisconsin, but I'm not sure. 1933. And it was according to this person and their observations, as sophisticated as they could be back in the day. They started forming these relationships with moon phase. And I don't know if that is when moon position. I want to say the moon position stuff probably was more with the fishing people for the feeding times relative to that, because of the tide, the influence of the gravitational pull on the tide, and I think that's where it began. Short answer is I don't know, and I haven't been able to dig it up, but it goes back decades upon decades.
Firmly embedded into the grasp of the culture.
Yeah,
That's right.
Okay, so and also that was a really good point that you just made there too about there's really good days and then there's really good times within those days. And Jacob, you mentioned that with the major and minor times. So what is the red moon?
The red moon, gosh, it's complicated. What makes the red moon different, as best we could tell, is that it is occurring when you also have a crepuscular period, meaning that you have this major phase or minor phase, etc., but that is co-occurring when you already have a good time of the day to begin with, meaning the sun is simultaneously coming up or setting. I think the way Natasha expressed it here is the red moon theory suggests that when the moon is overhead or underfoot, so it's up in the sky or it's down below you, that is happening simultaneous to the sun is coming up or the sun is setting. So it already sets you up for a good time to hunt anyway, because you're framing that hunt around sunrise and sunset. And this is supposed to be the icing on the cake, but also the moon is directly overhead or underfoot during that time.
So it's already a good time and you're just making it even better.
You're making it better.
That's better. Right.
Also, one other clarification for everybody, and Bronson, I could answer, but I want you to answer it. Can you talk about the minor periods of moon positioning? What is that? And also, again, you already clarified overhead and underfoot is pretty easy, but can you explain the minor periods?
So the major window is that is a 2-hour window of the moon being overhead or underfoot. So you got basically 2 hours there framework to when it is overhead or is when it is completely below you. That is a major window. A minor window is like we talk about when y'all pulled in this morning. The moon was on the horizon when the sun was rising as well. That is a 1-hour minor window. And so those are all of the combinations when you if you read the guide that's giving you all the optimal day and the stars, etc., it is picking the moon phase with those day ratings. And notice, too, with the day ratings, everything is built on 90% either new or either full, and then 95% or 99%. So all that is framed around is either completely new or completely full. All the stuff in the middle doesn't matter, doesn't have a rating. That's bad. But you have these special times where it's good. And then you add in where the moon is at relative to that. So that's how you get your optimal day.
Okay. So let's start talking about the results now.
Okay.
So it looks like y'all started out with the day ratings that we went over a second ago. So again, based on certain moon conditions, you might have a day rating of 1, which is the worst day. or a day rating of 4, which would be the best day to hunt. Based on, there's a lot of different calendars out there, but generally speaking, they're all kind of like that, right?
That's right. Exactly right.
All right, so let's walk through these results real quick. So what'd you guys find?
Nothing.
All right, guys, that's a wrap.
We'll catch you back on the next episode.
We'll catch you back on the next episode.
Well, this going back to what we talked about with the survey. This is why hindsight's always 20/20. This is one of those where I'm like, I'm so glad we not put people on the spot, but I'm glad we set that up of what is the baseline expectation for there's something going on here. Because like we said earlier, we're going to get a number. So we're going to have this baseline, and then based on a day rating of 1, it's not going to be exactly, because we're getting very precise estimates. There's going to be a little bit of a deviation. It's just how much of it is important. So we see from all of these, from a day rating of 1, which is supposedly not that good, to a day rating of 4, which is supposed to be double thumbs up. We see in a day rating of 1, there was a decrease of 2 yards per hour. Then we get to a day rating of 2. So now we're getting a little bit better. Now we're within 90% of that optimal time. We increased 1 yard per hour. And for me, with my pace, 1 yard, that's 1 step. So over an entire 60 minutes, the moon influenced me to take 1 more step. A day rating of 3, we're getting even better now. I took 4 steps, 4 yards per hour. That was my motivational increase by the luminosity of the moon. And then day rating of 4, which is supposed to be the best of all, it actually decreased from baseline 0.3 yards per hour. To me, the conclusion there is nothing. Now, Andrew, if that 4 yards per hour in the afternoon is important to you, then have at it, buddy. I wish you all the best.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know if 4 yards is going to do it for me.
That's like 46. Too low. What's going on?
Yeah, that's 46 too low. Yeah, I mean, and also it's such a small change, and the error rate on the collar, the GPS accuracy is 10 yards?
I'd say, around 10 to 15 yards, depending on where the buck is at.
So well within the margin of error. So, and especially because you go from day 1, it decreased, then it increased, then it increased, then it decreased again on the best day. It's just a wash. I mean, there's really nothing.
It's a complete wash.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
And then also on the side of the amount of time spent bedded.
That's right. So here again, we're trying to get back to, so let's just say that, hey, I'm not claiming when a buck's on its feet it's going to move faster. It's going to move at the exact same rate. But if he's up on his feet, remember our standard was half an hour, was 30 minutes. He had to be on his feet 30 minutes or more before it was meaningful, according to the survey.
Right.
But we're seeing numbers that are less than 1%. And the direction of that, again, flip-flop. So we have a day 1 rating to where there was an increased bedding of 0.4%, day rating of 2 of 0.7%, day rating of 3 of 0.1%, day rating of 4, the best day, it actually decreased. So it went in the right direction this time, but it's only 0.2%. So we didn't even change 1 percentage point in the amount of time they bedded.
So, and to again reiterate, these bucks outside the rut on average are bedding 34% of daylight hours.
Right.
So 0.2% would be like, I don't know, like 4 minutes or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
what would
minutes,
that be?
Minutes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. So that's underwhelming.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, if this is meaningful to you, then by all means, keep doing it. You have all met with people that are passionately follow this, and if they are successful doing it, who the heck are we to say that you need to stop doing it? Keep doing what works. But I'm looking at someone objective, and someone asked me, what did the data say? And we're just reporting what the data say.
Right. So then moving over to moon positioning. So again, looking at overhead, underfoot, major window, minor window, what were these results?
Yeah. So what we heard, I think from some feedback was, and I don't say this condescendingly at all, 'cause this would kind of be the reasoning. If you follow that the moon is influencing the tides, the gravitational pull of the moon is, of course, influencing the tides. Is it somehow stimulating a buck to get on his feet? Is it inducing hunger, etc.? Maybe that's reasonable, maybe it's not. But what we found is it only induced about a 3 yard per hour difference. So 3 steps, and for the bedding actually decrease. So we're kind of going in the right direction there. We had ever so slight uptick in their movement rate, and the amount of bedding went down 0.7%. So if that's enough of an effect to motivate you, I guess maybe you found something. And then on the minor window, so now the moon is rising or setting, the moon is on the horizon, we saw a 2 yard per hour increase, but then here we saw where bedding also increased. So we're getting mixed signals there. The movement rate increased slightly, but they also stayed in their bed a little bit longer as well. So for me, underwhelming again.
Yeah,
And the bedding,
conflicting.
And the bedding increase 0.3%. So it's interesting seeing all of this because, I mean, just based off what we're looking at so far, it's like this. There's zero effect, like noticeable, like large scale effect. I mean, the average person that did the survey was wanting to see 50 plus yards increase per hour of movement and leaving the bed 30 minutes earlier than normal. And we're talking about minutes
or seconds.
Minutes or seconds difference on bedding, and just a couple of yards difference, really, in all honesty, per hour change.
And the direction is not consistent.
And that's another
So
thing.
that's just error.
We haven't said our favorite word. Tortuosity.
Tortuosity. Not tortuosity.
No, hit it. Say it again.
Tortuosity.
Which is
Tortuosity.
Yeah, no,
Right?
I'm good.
Tortuosity.
Nailed it.
But again, which is movement that's not in a linear straight line. It's kind of going back and forth, kind of ping-ponging all over the place. So, like, you can have an increase in movement, but it doesn't mean he's coming directly to you or anything like that. So it just means more movement in those locations those deer are spending time in. Which, again, like you said, if you have confidence in it, keep doing it. I kind of which could throw Bronson a curveball and ask him his thoughts on scent control. But it's like if you do it and you have confidence doing it, keep doing it as long as you have confidence. Sure. If the data doesn't back it up, but you feel like you're more in the game when these certain factors, arise, great, because you're going to be more focused on the stand. Time in the stand is the most important factor. I think we've all come to realize with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But can I get to the next slide, Andrew?
Yeah, well, so then you took...
May I, a quick comment there? This, to me, I fully acknowledge I'm a dork and stuff like this is interesting. Placebo effect. So probably all your listeners are familiar with that. But placebo effect, essentially the sugar pill effect. Mm-hmm. I'm the physician. You come in, you have some ailment here. As the physician, I think this is in Andrew's head. I'm going to give him a little sugar pill here. And we're going to see and come back in a week and tell me how you feel. Doc, I feel great. That pill you gave me, that medication was fantastic.
Right.
And they could choose at that point to go, well, good. I'm glad the medication worked out. Pat you on your back, send you on your way. Or they may say, Andrew, it was all in your head, buddy, is a sugar pill. So everybody's familiar with that. What is interesting to me with some of this research is that, and I'm even talking about, this will blow your mind, I'm even talking about where they do surgery, like a knee replacement. And so go in and do a sham knee surgery where you have the incision and it looks like, and you come out of that thinking you had the knee replacement and you report, man, my knee feels so much better. So there's a psychological phenomenon obviously going on there. And then they follow it further with some people. Even when you tell them, Jacob, dude, buddy, I gave you a sugar pill, and they turn right around and say, I don't care, keep giving me the sugar pill because it is working for me. somehow psychologically that process of going to a physician or whoever is administering the pill or the treatment, and even though they're not giving you anything, it becomes part of your ritual. It's what and it gives you satisfaction, and it makes whatever condition you're involved in, it makes it better. So all that is a context, I think, playing on what you said. If you have got something that works, if examining the moon position and the phase and all that, if it makes you hunt better, if it makes you more confident, I'm not going to say stop doing it, because what you're doing is effective and it's working for you. Mm-hmm. But there is some psychology behind that.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're gonna go a little bit further down that rabbit hole after we talk about the next thing, moon position and moon phase. So explain that you're combining. Hold on. In this one, you're looking at those major windows, right?
Yes.
And looking specifically at the movement in those 2-hour time frames. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
For a major window, it would be a 2 hour. For a minor window, it would be 1 hour.
Right.
But so this is putting together both the position data and the day rating. So now we're doing the phase. So you got the rating based on full or new or not. And now the time of day based on where the position of the moon.
So you're looking at the best time of day for each of these day ratings. So again, day rating 1, the worst day, to a day rating 4, the best day. And then you're looking at what is supposed to be the best time of day for you to hunt on those days.
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
the window time would then be predicting what we assume is the movement bout. It's the inducing the buck to be up on his feet and moving for the feeding time or whatever. So that's what that is. And we essentially see the exact same results. So in the major window, moon overhead or underfoot with a day rating of 1 being the worst, meaning it's not new or full, we see a 1 yard per hour increase, and we see a decrease in bedding of 0.6%.
That's the best time of the worst day.
That's the best time of the worst day, exactly. So now let's go to the best time of the best day, and we have an increase, at least it's in the right direction, of 4 yards per hour, and we have a decrease, again, less of bedding of less than 1%, 0.9%. In the minor window, if I'm remembering correctly, this was our biggest result, was in the minor window on a day rating of 4, our biggest increase was 10 yards per hour. Now, whether, and not to get too complicated about statistics here, but there is a phenomenon within statistics to where think about rolling dice and that sort of stuff, is that eventually, if you run 100 experiments, even though every one is completely controlled for you, doing the same thing, but eventually out of random casino probability, out of those 100 experiments, by random chance, a couple of them are going to hit. And so this day rating of 4 in the minor window, it could just be one of those. It could be by random chance that we saw this really, really big effect of 10 yards per hour. But then what doesn't correspond, we also saw an increase in bedding of 1%. So at least with the bedding, we have a whole number, 1. There's a little bit of an increase of 1%. But what doesn't coincide with that was they also increased their movement 10 yards per hour, which again is only 10 yards per hour versus the standard that respondents said of 50.
It's only 20% of what the threshold people were going to see a value of.
Right.
That's incredible. Just not in the right way.
Yeah.
All right. So then what about dawn and dusk?
Okay, so dawn and dusk, that's mainly just, of course, we're just looking at, that's already the best times for deer movement, period. So within just around sunrise and around sunset, can we see that the moon position is going to affect that or phase? And so that's what we have here, is that if we just look at the morning or afternoon hours with a major window and a day rating of 1, we see a decrease in movement of 0.4 yards per hour and a decrease in bedding of 0.8. Again, to me, we're just oscillating around zero. Sometimes they tilt a little positive, sometimes they tilt a little negative, but we're not really getting a lot of weight. And then when we move to the minor window, that 1 hour, moon is on the horizon, rising or setting. With a day rating of 1, we see a decrease of 10 yards per hour, a little bit of an increase in bedding of 2, so we have a whole number again. Day rating of 4 in the minor window, an increase of 3 yards per hour, 0 change at all in bedding.
So, okay, talking about the minor window here, the day rating of 1. So this is one of the better parts of the worst day.
Worst day according to phase.
Worst day according to phase, it went down 10 yards. Their movement went down 10 yards, and they were bedded 2% more of the time.
Right.
Okay. And then the day rating of 4, they moved 3 yards more. So, again, one of the better times of the best day, they went up 3 yards and 0% change in bedding. So, again, that's like where, for me, when I'm looking at this, that seems like it conflicts to me, right? I mean, even if it's the worst day, if it's the better part of the worst day, why would it go down, right? And I just feel like you just said, I think you just put it perfectly. You're kind of oscillating around 0, like it's just right there. I mean, if it was like a graph of 0 and it goes 0 to 100 and 0 to negative 100, you're just like staying right there on that line,
right?
Yeah, very disappointing.
And there's a fun fact on here that Bronson, I'd love for you to read.
Oh, this is good.
Because when we listened to the episode, I think Luke was the one that brought this up on y'all's episode with Deer University, the 70% of the minor windows. Touch on that real quick, because I feel like this is kind of that placebo effect anyways, because we all know, and the data shows this on deer movement, that your spike of activity for a deer or whitetail deer is going to be dawn dusk. Okay, first couple hours daylight.
No matter what.
Yeah, last couple of hours, last hour of daylight as well. And it so happens that coincides a little bit with these minor periods. Mm-hmm. So what did that really do for you guys, as in, like, does that almost lend itself more towards the placebo effect, that like people are just assuming the minor period, that rising or setting moon at dawn or dusk is making a bigger impact than just the timing of the actual,
crepuscular.
Yeah, there you go. Hooked on phonics didn't work for me. So, which I mean is their natural movement period, anyways.
Right.
So
yeah. A little background with that too is in some previous studies where people had just looked at major windows, minor windows, is sometimes they would report some statistically significant results with the minor windows. Of course, that intrigued us. Like, how can this be that we're not seeing that? We're accounting for this. We're accounting for that. A real important part of the story too is that Natasha, with her math skills, she is controlling for every buck's baseline, not just an individual buck's baseline for his behavior, but his behavior within a 2-week time frame. So we're accounting for rut, non-rut, etc. But then also the hour of the day. And so she can come in, if you just want to say, hey, we've got a moon condition on this day and a moon condition on that day, and we want to look at it at 8 a.m., she can zero in to that buck and what is its normal movement rate for 14 consecutive days for 8 a.m. And that is exactly what she would do. So she would look at that particular time, comparing the buck against his own baseline, and then the deviation from that buck's movement for that day at that hour. And then we compare that, then we have the average for all the bucks based on their baseline at that hour. So that's how we get this number. So we were seeing that other people were reporting that they were getting a clear signal for the minor period. I'm not an astronomist, I'm not a physicist or all this kind of stuff. So I'm not familiar with all these relationships. But when Natasha started looking at it, she's like, well, there's a correlation here. There's a geometry problem, evidently, to where 70-ish% of these minor periods where people are reporting a signal, those are happening during crepuscular time periods when the sun is up and when the sun is setting. And so the way she did it, she's already controlling for the crepuscular time period because she's doing it by hour, day in, day out. And so when we looked at the minor window, when other people reported they were finding something but weren't controlling for the things we controlled for, we were not seeing it. And so that was a little bit of an aha there was, oh, well, we have a co-occurrence of a whole bunch of the minor windows that appear to be significant. That's crepuscular. So you're looking at the wrong signal. That's a signal of sun's coming up and sun is coming down, not really where the position of the moon is at.
That is super, and that does explain a lot of the maybe confirmation bias.
Oh,
dude, I just had a Jacob moment.
Yeah, I was like, what?
Golly, man. Anyways, so that could account for that. That does account for the minor windows.
Yes.
Being because actually Michael's talked about that a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, our buddy Michael, is big on the minor windows specifically, but just because of how I don't know the moon is rotating the Earth and astrology and how all that work or astronomy, how all that works. It just happens to be that 70% of those fall at that crepuscular time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So that was kind of an answer right there. And, some of these too, when we were Natasha was trying to go through again, all of the day ratings with all of the different major windows and minor windows. Well, some of those combinations, you kind of look at a factorial of your different major, minor, and all of your day rate. Some of those combinations never happened just out of geometry and the sun, the earth, the moon, and where they're at. Some of those never happened.
I know y'all didn't look at this. Someone probably is going to comment. What about eclipse? If you had an eclipse.
I don't know if we had one during that period.
No, probably not.
We did recently, but I don't know if we had one during the period we had the box collared.
I have heard that before from individuals. After how many, years you got to try to time that up. Like if you have a direct eclipse, everything seems like I've been in Nashville. It was like 6, 7, 8 years ago when they had a total eclipse in Nashville, and it, all the birds, kind of like did their little evening chirps and it went quiet for that 10, 15, 20 minutes and then kind of woke back up. It was very weird. I'm not gonna lie, standing out there.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know how often you're going to time a hunt with an
That's
eclipse.
like asking us about hunting in snow. It's like, I don't know. We get it one time a decade, pretty much.
Yeah. Anyway,
You don't know nothing about that. Okay, that's very interesting. And then the next slide is what about when bucks bed down in the evening and then leave their bed, or bed down in the morning and then leave their bed in the evening. So this is another one that was, I feel like, a big point for us and a lot of people that we talk to is if the moon has some kind of small effect that would matter for us as hunters, it would be when do they bed in the morning and when do they get up in the evening. So ideally, if the moon had an effect that was positive for us as hunters, it would be making the bucks get up earlier in the evenings, pretty much.
Sure.
And or staying out a little bit later into daylight and walking around in the mornings. So what'd y'all find with this?
Yeah, so that is precisely what we were looking at there. And, we kind of have this assumption that once a buck has finished his morning movement bout, he's going to bed down, at 9:30 or 10 or whatever, and he's going to be there until 2 or 3 and get up. But in reality, there's a bunch of different bedding events that are happening. And the movement in between isn't going to be severe or dramatic or long distance, but they're still getting out of their bed and moving a little bit. But essentially, we wanted to look at the timing of their first movement bout of the morning and then comparing that, when do they get up out of their bed for the last time for the day. So we're excluding all the stuff in the middle. We're just looking at, and Natasha called it, the bedding down time and then the leaving time. And so during major windows, we saw there was a 0.7 minutes later bedding down time in major window and a 1.5 minutes later leaving time in the afternoon. So we're under a minute when they bed down in the morning, it's 1.5 minutes later in the afternoon. And then with the minor window, now there's a larger number. That's probably our largest number, is in a minor window, they bedded down 18 minutes later in the morning. Now, instead of bedding down at 9 o'clock, it was 9:18. That may be really, really important to some people. So, if you want to report something positive, there it is. So they bedded down 18 minutes later, so it appears they were a little more active in the morning during that, and they left their bed 6 minutes earlier. So they bedded down a little later, and they left their bed a little bit earlier for a minor window in terms of bedding timing.
How do you read that? Do you feel like that's the error with the crepuscular movement?
Valid question. I don't know if that's real or not. This is one of those things, again, like I was explaining, if you run 100 experiments, sometimes you hit, sometimes you don't. And I don't know. I would have a lot more confidence in that if we had seen a stronger signal more consistently all along.
That was exactly what I was about to ask, because some people might go through this and it's, a whole lot of disappointment. But then you get to that number and you're like, oh, there's something that is kind of what people were expecting per the survey, but you're kind of writing it off. And the reason that you're saying you would write that off is because pretty much all the other numbers are just jumbled and nothing, zero, essentially.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That makes sense.
Well, it makes sense to me. It may not make sense to someone in the audience, but yeah.
So then what about the full moon having more light?
This is grandpa analysis right here. So this is just back to luminosity and what the uncles and the grandfathers used to say about the full moon, new moon. We just wanted to make sure we covered that because we knew we would get asked. So it's not about day rating or any of that. It's just when you have a full moon and when you have a new moon. And so for there on a full moon, we saw a decrease of 4 yards per hour and a decrease of 0.5% bedded. And then on a new moon, so completely opposite moon condition here relative to luminosity, we still saw a decrease of 3 yards per hour and a decrease of 0.9% bedding time.
So that's daylight movement.
That's right.
Only.
Correct.
Did y'all look at it for nighttime as well?
We did not.
Okay.
Only daylight.
Okay. Interesting. So,
oh my gosh, this brings back memories. Oh my gosh,
good or bad?
Interesting. Neither.
Okay.
Interesting conversation.
One time we were doing this podcast, our buddy Michael, who's a big moon guy, he used to co-host a lot of these with us, and he would always bring things out of left field just because he's like a dear mad scientist. And one day we were recording. And just absolutely out of nowhere, he starts talking about perigee and apogee. And we're like, I've never heard that word in my entire life. And he's talking about well, the moon is however many miles. And he had the exact thing. And we're like, what are you talking about? And you have it here on this slide.
I wasn't expecting this.
I was not expecting this at all.
No, which is interesting. So it's the distance between the moon and the earth, perigee and apogee. So yeah, let's go through this. I'm interested.
Intrigued.
Intrigued is probably the better word.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. We didn't even, or Natasha didn't even provide numbers here. But again, combing through and, as we're finding these results and we're talking to people and they're, need to look at this, you need to look at that. If you don't look at this, somebody's going to ask you about it. And this was one of these as well. So if you're looking at just this greater, more holistic effect of the gravitational pull of the moon, when it is closest to the Earth, we would assume that is when it's have the biggest effect. And when it is furthest away in its orbit, it had the least amount of effect. And so she went in, and now you're not going to have a bunch of days where that's happening. It's one of those where you have a series of day to where, if this is the Earth, it's closest. So you have 2 or 3 days is closest, and then apogee furthest away. But there was no difference, no change.
Yeah.
Didn't affect it at all.
So as we've had these conversations, we had a buck bedding conversation with you. We've had we read through one of your papers of buck movement across the landscape, that paper. We've now recorded this with you. We've talked about weather and everything before as well.
Epigenetics.
We've talked about a lot of different subjects with you on this. And one thing specifically when it comes to the deer movement that it seems like just keeps cropping up is that the deer kind of do what they do every day. And they move on average a certain amount, and that increases as you get closer to the rut and then decreases after the rut. And outside of that, they kind of do the same thing every day. Yep. And with our brains as human beings, we always want to look for patterns. And so my brain goes to like, this just sounds like a lot of confirmation bias to me, because if they're doing roughly the same thing every day, and also you gave an interesting statistic, I don't know if it was on this episode or the last one, where you said that at any given point on all your GPS collar data, no matter what time of day, 50% or less than bucks were bedded down. So it doesn't matter. Pull a time out of the hat. 11 a.m., only half the bucks are bedded down at most.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So if you hunt enough and you have enough encounters with deer, you can kind of draw whatever pattern you want out of your anecdotal evidence. Am I off base there?
You're not off base at all. I think you're spot on. And, you know, that is, none of us are psychologists at all, but, you know, that is something unique to the human brain that I think has served humans very, very well over vast amounts of time, is pattern recognition, figuring out a pattern. That's what makes us successful. But it can also lead you astray, where you're looking for a pattern when it really doesn't exist. We also like a more complicated story. We also like the secret sauce. I figured it out. There's this hidden dimension, nobody else. And the bottom line, I used to joke, Steve Damaris, when he was teaching years ago, he'd always say this. I was like, good grief, that's so rudimentary. he would say, here's what you need to know about deer management. You know, deer eat and deer breed. And you're waiting for part C. And there's no part C. You need to understand how deer tick. They eat and they breed. And it gets down to management, and it's really what we're seeing with movement is they have to eat every day. They have to eat every single day. Now, bucks will run more, they'll lose more weight during the rut, et cetera, but they're going to feed every single day. Those are going to be centered on, those movement bouts are going to be centered on the sun, crepuscular, when the sun is coming up, when the sun is coming down. And then, as we've talked about other times, all of that changes on the deer eat versus deer breed. Here's the deer breed. And then all those movement rates are essentially going to double during the rut. Because now, for a buck, his priorities have changed from his belly to reproduction. And so now he's reproducing. And to me, it's just everything we see comes back to those two effects. Movement bout, big movement bouts a couple times a day to fill their rumen, to sustain their bodies, and then increase foregoing food, chasing does during the rut. And everything else to me is noise.
Yep. And I think this graph that you have here, it's how are deer more active in different rut, moon, and sun times, maybe drives that point home even a little bit better, because you've got it broken out by your major time, your minor time, and then your dawn and dusk time. And then you have another bar, a blue bar, for all data. So that's everything kind of averaged out, correct? Mm-hmm. And you got it broken out by no rut, pre-rut, early rut, peak rut, late rut, and post-rut. And there's just no outliers, is the thing.
Right.
You would expect there to be like some kind of outlier here, but there's really just nothing. It's kind of a boring graph.
It's a very boring graph. It's very telling.
I mean, whoever made it, it's
boring.
a beautiful graph.
Right.
Whoever made it, but it's kind of boring.
So this also, there were two reasons we put this in here. Number one is to show the rut, how you know, nothing is superseding the rut. But also now, remember all the numbers we talked about previously. There was a 3 yards per hour. There was our big number with 10 yards per hour. When you put that in context relative to the average for all of these periods, you just start seeing that is a trivial amount.
Yeah, that's a good point. It kind of drives home how small of a change that really is.
Right.
I got one input on this, and Bronson, I want you to clarify for me. Major time is twice a day, 2 hours each,
Believe so.
and then minor is 1 hour twice a day.
Right.
So total 2 hours versus 4 hours. Now on here, I'm just looking at to say like peak rut. They're balanced out at almost the same yardage within 1 yard of each other, but the major would be 2 hours longer, correct?
The major window.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's 1 hour longer. It'd be 1 hour longer.
Yeah, 2 hour window versus a 1 hour window.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So, interesting. No,
So you're saying that it's remarkable that they're even though the minor is 1 hour less
Correct.
time?
yeah.
Okay. What do you say to that?
Well, you're looking at a rate.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it occurred over 6 hour, it's yards per hour. So it's still on that hourly scale.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
gotcha.
And notice in peak rut there, where you see a little bit of a decrease in minor and major, notice dawn and dusk.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's it.
Just regular old dawn and
See,
dusk.
I thought I found something. I thought I was going to be like, oh, look what I found. Like,
Yeah,
I didn't think about
gotcha.
this. And no, not at all.
Got
Not
the
at all.
biologist.
No. Okay. Yeah.
So
A lot of heartbroken.
yeah, I mean, I'll be very curious to hear all the comments and criticisms of this because, at least for me, with my questions about the moon, again, we touched on some of the methodology in here and how you guys broke it down. But again, if someone listening wants a really real deep dive into it, the real nuts and bolts of how they measured everything, you can go listen to the podcast I mentioned earlier, the MSU did. But after you explaining all this, I mean, I don't really have any kind of rebuttal for it at this point. I don't know. Maybe I'll think of something when I'm driving home. but right now, I mean, it kind of answers all the questions because you looked at to kind of wrap things up. You looked at the moon luminosity, the moon position, and then you looked at it hour by hour, including at the best times of the best days, to see if there was anything. And it was kind of similar to all the rest of the data. I mean, nothing. There was no outlier.
That's
really.
right.
No significant outlier, and nothing that even came close to what most people in the survey said they would consider significant.
So the one time that we rolled the dice, out of all the experiments of rolling the dice, one time we got double sixes.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got double sixes, the answer was 10 yards per hour or so, which is 20% of the threshold that Hunter said it needs to be at least this much. We predict that whatever moon condition, it would be at least 50 yards per hour increase. Well, the best result we got, whether it's true or whether it's random chance, was 10 yards per hour, give or take.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, man, that's something. So, do you think that if you had a much larger sample size, do you think that what do you think the data would end up looking like? Do you think it would move in one direction or another? Do you think you would start seeing more of a difference in like an increase in movement, or do you think it would get closer and closer to zero?
I think if we did this experiment in Alberta or South Florida or Kansas or Mississippi, I think other than out of all those individuals, there would be some little numbers would be different because of random chance, but I think the conclusion would be the same.
Okay.
Which comes back to when I put you on the spot earlier, I said, why?
Mm-hmm.
No one has given me, in my opinion, a reason for why would deer evolve responding to the moon?
Right.
Why would it's like some of these reasons for such and such happened and it changed the rut. The rut's earlier. It stimulated the rut.
Oh.
This, that, and the other.
Yeah.
We have to think about the process of evolution and natural selection, etc. The most reliable clock for a doe of when she needs to come into estrus. That's the rut. When she's coming into estrus, temperature is not a reliable clock. November 15th, it may be 80 degrees one year, it may be 15 degrees the next. That's extreme. But you see, we don't need temperature to govern when a doe is going to come in. This is what is most important to her, is she's going to get pregnant. She's going to have a baby. She's going to carry it for 7 months and drop it. So the timing, evolution and natural selection has worked out that timing very, very well. Ones that are most successful when they're timing, they breed and they pass that timing on. Mm-hmm. But photoperiod, the ratio of daylight hours to nighttime hours is consistent year in and year out. That is the trigger. Photoperiod is the trigger for when a doe comes into estrus. That makes perfect sense. How does the moon affect that? Why would the moon affect that?
Right. That brings up a great point. In early 2024, you started seeing some things about how in 2024 there was going to be a bifurcated rut, meaning that because of something that only happens every however many years, the rut was going to essentially be split in half. Something that happens with the moon every however many years it was. And there was some articles floating around about this, and everyone's like, the rut's going to be bifurcated this year, meaning it's going to be split in half. First rut's going to be mid-October. Second rut is going to be around Thanksgiving. And we talked about it a little bit on the podcast because we got a bunch of questions about it where people were like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? And at the time, I was just like, because I've heard the photoperiod thing before, I'm like, I don't understand how that is even possible. Because it's not like a huge mystery what sends does in estrus, right? I mean, it's been pretty well figured out.
You're exactly right.
What's your take on the bifurcated rut?
I have no take on that.
Yeah.
I say this with all due respect. I think that's total nonsense, but I will gladly stand corrected if there's data to prove me otherwise.
Right.
But ecologically, that does not make any sense to me. A doe coming in to heat and breeding and her fawn being successful, meaning living or not, that is the currency of their existence, is making sure their offspring survive. That's their job, is to make babies and perpetuate their genetics. And the whim of a moon condition, or it's abnormally hot or cold, why would a doe jeopardize that when it is completely evolutionarily set in stone that photoperiod is the single most reliable clock? It has worked for thousands and thousands of years to perpetuate the species.
I've got a question on variability between a herd dynamics of when does come into estrus, because it's not like they all come in like all 100 does on 30,000 acres come into heat on the same day. What dictates the variability between does and like doe family groups? I mean, if anything, just by a couple days or a week or whatever.
That's a good question. I hope I can answer it. Let's compare and contrast north and south. In the north, the population, the rut needs to be very precise up north, because you have a window of time to where it is optimal. And there's still no guarantees the fawn is going to survive, but you've got a narrow window of when that fawn has to hit the ground. If the fawn hits the ground too early, it's going to freeze. If the fawn hits the ground too late, it's not going to have enough time to build sufficient body mass to live through the winter. So they have a really tight window of when the fawn, and that's why you see so often up north, the rut, it doesn't matter if you're this part of the Midwest or in the rut's pretty defined right there. When you get into the South, it's just all over the place. And a lot of that is basically we do not have the same strong environmental selective force that is going to affect fawn survival relative to weather. So you can think about where y'all are at. Probably not that big of a deal if a fawn was dropped in May versus June versus July. It's just not that big of a deal. The winter is going to be mild. They're probably going to live through it. So that's where we see a much more expanded rut. That's why it's not as concise here. There is also, that is inherited from doe to daughter to fawn, is they inherit that. So there's a genetic linkage to her. So one of the explanations for why we see so many different is based on restocking. And so there's a legacy of the source population from where they're from, whether it's up north. So if you got some places in Alabama with a really early rut, probably more of a genetic history and a legacy of that. And then you got some places where, in Mississippi, a lot of the places we had deer from Mexico, Texas, et cetera, brought in during restocking. So that's literally why you see the disparity for that. Steve did an analysis, a project years and years ago, but down in South Mississippi, just the next county over, adjacent counties, they had a month difference in rut dates, and you could trace it all the way back to kind of stocking history and just the genetic legacy of that. And so a mom's successful, she lived, she passes on her genetics, and that fawn is going to be in that same window, and you just kind of see that perpetuated and perpetuated over time.
How much of an influence does nutrition play on how hard deer rut, quote unquote? The reason I bring that up is because we had a drought this year. A lot of the South has had a drought these last 2 years. And at least in our area, the mast crop was like a bust. There just wasn't a lot of food on the ground. And this year, again, it depends on where your area is. But like in the areas that we've hunted, the sign as compared to previous years has been very underwhelming. There, not as many big scrapes, not as many big rubs as there used to be. And then even some of the bucks that I haven't killed. I ain't killed nothing this year in Alabama. But some of our friends have killed. Some of them will kill a buck that's stinking. He's ready to go. Rutting buck. The next one, same area. His tarsals are fluffy. Doesn't stink. Just doesn't look like he's been getting after it. Could that be due to they're just more stressed, so they're just not going at it as hard this year?
Have you and Mariah been talking?
No. No.
He asked that same thing about a week ago.
Really?
Yeah, literally. He heard that same thing, been thinking about it. So I'll tell you, like I told him, I don't know. To my knowledge, I've never seen any evidence to suggest that. I've never seen a study that really narrowed that down, that effect. I'm not saying it's unreasonable, but to me, I just think about the drive to breed for a buck, supersedes everything. Mm-hmm. Something like that, his body condition. We know that bucks will easily, not young bucks, but middle-aged and older, they'll easily lose 20 and up to 30% of their body weight rutting. Mm-hmm. Even when you get to the end of the rut and they look terrible. They look like they're in terrible condition. And if a doe comes by that's giving him the right smell, he is right back at it. So when I think of things like that, I don't buy into it, mm-hmm. but I may be wrong. It seems like a good way to maybe assess that would be, if you could do it, would be to artificially stress deer via nutrition and maybe examine their behavior. Does it change? And then maybe also examine testosterone levels. So to me, it would be, is nutrition affecting secretion of testosterone, and maybe that's affecting their behavior.
Yeah, that's what we've been having conversations about with some friends of ours. It's like, if the doe comes by, he's going to go get her, right? But is he cruising like 3 miles like he normally would, or is he shortening that? Which that seems like it would be incredibly hard to figure out on a wild deer population. But it's just kind of food for thought. Just I've had a tough year this year. A lot of people that we've talked to have also had a pretty tough year. And I don't know if it's just the mast. I actually usually struggle on bad mast years, and this year has been no exception. It's been kind of rough. But do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So that buck I mentioned, I guess it was last episode.
Yeah,
another episode. But it killed my best Alabama deer this year in public, and when I shot him, I say big body relative for there, probably 175 pounds. Pretty confident, 4.5 years or older. I got to pull the jawbone. Anyways, he's at the processor still. But when I killed him, he was working a scrape. He didn't pee the scrape. He was working the licking branch, thrashing the licking branch, shot him. When I walked up to him, I didn't notice this until I drug him back to where I could get him loaded up and get him out on the truck. his tarsal glands, this is an area that it would be very much like the last part of peak rut in this area. His tarsal glands had no smell. He didn't have any stink to them, and they were fluffy with just a touch of staining, which I've never seen from a deer getting killed, a buck getting killed that late into like the rutting period. And he was, you could say, cruising, hitting a scrape line, but I was dumbfounded by that. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it was just.
I have. But I don't have an explanation.
Do you just think some bucks just don't mark themselves all that much compared to others? I'm sure it's a personality thing, maybe.
Yeah, I was actually talking to Eric Mitchell, who y'all met earlier, about this topic and maybe some research. Is that also governed by testosterone? Or does some just scent mark more? Do they just display it more? So, got a chicken egg type thing here. Is it that they're aggressive and they also have more testosterone, and as such, they mark their tarsal, rub urination far more often, engage in scrapes, rubs, etc.? Or is it just that they have, for whatever reason, less testosterone and they don't engage in that activity? One thing we saw in the deer pens, there is something to attitude. And what we documented was you could take 2 bucks, same age, relatively same body size. Some of them want to fight. They are wanting to, always with the dominance hierarchy, always trying to suppress younger bucks, always being dominant, and they have more success breeding. They will sire more fawns at the beginning of the rut. But you being more aggressive and you fighting more and you averting eating as much because you're more worried about fighting and other stuff. But what you'll see is that over time, their frequency of breeding goes down, and the nice guy that wasn't ripping everybody apart and the buck you weren't scared to get in the pen with because he's going to kill you, he now starts taking over, and he starts breeding more females. And for us, it was just related to body condition. So the more aggressive they were, lots of breeding success, body condition up here, then over time, body condition goes down, 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 down because they're fighting. And then the guy over here wasn't very active, always got pushed around, wasn't going to engage. His body condition more or less stayed the same. More breeding events. So they're crisscrossed by the end of the rut.
Would you suspect that a buck like that, the more passive buck, probably wouldn't fight as much as well?
Yes.
Okay. So something, I don't have photos of it. I may. He was scarred up, puncture wounds in his chest and his back, and his ears were all split open from fighting.
Sounds like he got whooped a couple times.
Yeah, but because that was another thing. That's one of the first things I noticed. I looked at him like, man, he's been getting tore up. Just like his chest and his back, like you can see puncture wounds kind of like all in him and like streaks of hair missing on him. But again, wasn't stinking, nothing like that. It just blew my mind. But
he may have had some physiological triggers as well. Infection may have been coursing through his body because of the puncture wounds, et cetera. And his body said, just like what we'll see, this is a very broad scale, but when you have a real severe environmental event, it may be deep snow up north. For us, is flooding. When you start really stressing those deer out and allocating them to small areas because there's water all around, they will drop their antlers. It may be a month or more ahead of time. And our interpretation is just their body saying you're in horrific condition. And now we have to shift from, we're not worrying about breeding, we're worried about surviving. And so they drop their antlers and they focus their activity on food. I don't know if that's the answer, but to me it might be that his body was in bad shape, puncture wounds, infection, et cetera. So maybe he's getting through his bloodstream, some cues that let's knock off on the rutting behavior so much here.
Interesting.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's fascinating. Again, that's the one thing I love about whitetails. There's very few, if any, absolutes in whitetails. And to me, that's what makes them fun to hunt. The only thing that make them cooler is if they bugled.
That would be cool.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't think.
I don't know, man. Well, I heard a buck roar earlier this year that I was like, why don't they do that more often? It was like, I didn't even know what I was hearing. It was so loud. He heard one too.
Yeah.
Same area. But that's you know how you hear it on TV, like the whole buck roar thing? I'd never heard one before until this year. And in Alabama, I heard
did
one.
that, and then just 10 grunts behind it.
Yep.
It was
Yeah.
like,
Very impressive.
scared the crap out of you for a hot second. It was a nice, cool afternoon, and all of a sudden you hear that, like, and then,
Oh, just that extended grunt.
yeah,
Oh,
like
yeah.
deep.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
the way I described the one I heard, it was almost like it started like a
Almost like a growl.
like a growl, and then it get really aggressive, like almost like you max out a grunt call, and then
Yeah.
just
Yeah, like
you know,
if you max out a grunt call, that's a good way to put it.
it was obnoxious. And
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
When you're the first time I was on a deer capture when I was in grad school years ago, and so they were using a helicopter driving bucks to a net, and so this was before net guns and helicopters. You just the helicopter would move them through, and they'd hit a drive net, and I remember being overwhelmed with the sounds that the buck was making. You know, I had no idea a deer would make that like eerie kind of sound they would make. But it's this roar, grunt, roar kind of sound, and it's really amazing.
Wow. Man, that sounds pretty fun. Chasing bucks in a helicopter.
It was fun.
That sounds cool.
It was cool.
I've always said, like, do that with a net gun in like South Texas would be an absolute blast.
Yeah,
But,
man. You deer researchers, y'all get to do some pretty cool stuff. You got a cool job.
Every once in a while, we sure do.
Awesome. Well, at a point of wrapping up, Bronson, do you have anything else kind of want to leave us with, and where people kind of learn a little bit more about what you have going on and everything?
One thing I did fail to mention, we don't have it out yet. It is literally all the numbers have been crunched. It's done. It is with our publication people right now. But this moon study, we have developed a publication with all the numbers, all the figures, very user friendly. And when that becomes available, we will on social provide a download link, and it'll be free, just like that Buck Movement pub we did a while back.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So it'll be there free for download. Anything research-wise, of course, just go to the msudeerlab.com. Of course, social media, Facebook, Instagram, our YouTube channel, MSU Deer Lab TV, and then, of course, our podcast, Deer University. Me individually, I'm in a transition right now, so I am no longer a co-director of the MSU Deer Lab. Steve recently retired, and I'm stepping down as well and kind of moving into the private world. And so me and a partner, we have developed a consulting and land management company called Wildlife Investments. And so anything on the private side you want to get in touch with me, you can go to our website, wildlifeinvestments.com, and happy to talk to you.
Yep, and we'll link that below too. We'll link Wildlife Investment so you can go find it.
Thank you.
In the description.
Anything else? If you want Dr. Strickland to come walk your property with you, got your opportunity.
Yeah.
So, anyways, no. Other than that, appreciate everybody watching the podcast. Thank y'all for listening, and we'll catch you back here on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.